I'm not telling you that they don't have some ability at some point to go back and get involved, but they also have an ability to get killed doing that. And I don't think anybody should doubt the capacity of the United States of America to protect Americans.
You can't help but worry about them in Doha. And we have no information on how the United States is actually going to see that they remain in Doha, that they make no comments, that they do no agitation. And another rumor is that one Taliban has apparently said that he would return to the battlefield. So it's a mixed bag at best.
The chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee responded to the Secretary of State on this issue, this about the 5 Taliban now in Qatar. There is also reporting tonight from Steve Hayes at the Weekly Standard that those detainees at Gitmo knew that this transfer was going to happen likely, as opposed to Congress, which did not. Quote, sources with knowledge of the transfer tell the Weekly Standard that prisoners at Guantanamo understood in the days before the transfer that something significant was imminent and may well have known who was being transferred. The security profile at Guantanamo had been raised, these sources say, and the daily routines of several prisoners had been broken up. Ramzi Qassem, the law professor at the City University of New York who has represented the detainees, told the Associated Press the coming transfer was hardly a secret among the prison population. In testimony last week, James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, was asked whether Bergdahl's failing health meant the exchange had to be expedited. He said, quote, the intel wouldn't support that, he replied. Let's bring in our panel. Tucker Carlson, host of Fox and Friends Weekend. Julie Pace, White House correspondent for the Associated Press, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Tucker, I guess the biggest thing you heard this weekend was about Congress and how upset they are about this process.
Not as upset as you would imagine they would be as a co-equal branch of government watching their authority eroded year after year by the executive. I mean, you did see Dianne Feinstein with an invulnerable seat. She's not doing this to pander to voters in the midterms, that's for sure. She's upset. But the fact that the prisoners, if Hayes' reporting is right, and I bet it is, knew before they did, it's almost unbelievable. The more you know about the story, the more confusing it is. My current bafflement stems from this. If you're the Obama administration and you want to close Gitmo and get rid of these guys, sending them to Qatar is not the only option. Why didn't they put them on trial? John Walker Lind is spending 20 years in prison in Indiana right now for aiding the Taliban. That's one of the 2 charges he pled to. You couldn't charge these guys with that? Of course you could. The constitutional law professor claims to believe in the system, the justice system, and laws. You didn't need to do this to close Gitmo. So why did they do this? I honestly don't understand. I think it's very odd.
Julie, also finding out that that Bergdahl is telling his doctors, apparently, in Landstuhl, Germany, that he was tortured and kept in a cage or confinement, and that he is not talking to his parents. What about this story, where it's headed?
It's a really complex story, and every day a new piece comes out that raises a whole new set of questions. I mean, I think that one thing we can all agree on is that Bergdahl clearly went through an incredibly traumatic experience, and we're going to learn more details about that. We don't know exactly what happened to him. We don't know what he went through. We don't know why he doesn't want to talk to his family at this point. I think that the angle with Congress, though, is going to continue to be a real driving factor in this town, because when you have people like Dianne Feinstein, who's a Democrat, who largely is supportive of the White House, though she does differ on some issues, continuing to drive this conversation and say we don't have answers, it's going to be hard to put this aside.
It's obviously not just her. The ranking member of that committee is Senator Saxby Chambliss, also leaving Congress, but here's what he said.
They were concerned that if they did not make this exchange, that his life would be in danger as a result of bad health. Well, no intelligence supported that. And now they come back, and because he is in decent health considering where he's been, they've changed their story. They said, well, no, we suspect his life may be in danger if word got out of this pending possible trade that his life may be in danger. Again, I can just tell you there's no intelligence to support that, and Director Clapper has already made that same statement. So the whole scenario surrounding this is very, very strange.
Charles, you've said that you would make this deal, but what about that? That it is very strange, all of the around this whole thing.
It's beyond. I mean, I think it's very explicable. They're trying to find reasons to justify it, other than saying we made a bad deal, one that injures the country, but we felt we had an overwhelming obligation to spring this last guy. That's the argument. There's no other argument. And Kerry and the others should try telling the truth. You know, it's easier to memorize. He says we don't have to worry about the 5 guys that we released. We have an eye on them. That's a joke. Everybody understands that these guys are loose. They're probably working right now. They have all kinds of communication. They're going to end up in Afghanistan. We know that. Say it honestly. The bravado of saying we're watching them and we can kill them as if it's some kind of, Hunger Game action here. And secondly, what Chambliss is saying is also true. The idea, they invented the idea that he was about to die, it sounded like, because of health reasons. All of a sudden he shows up, and that apparently is not true, so they make up a second excuse. Well, they would have killed him had the word leaked out. Chambliss is telling us there's no evidence of that. Why not just say the truth? It was a hard deal, a difficult deal, a repulsive deal, but we did it. Again, the same way other countries in redeeming their captives. But the lie after lie, and also the pretense that this ought to be something we ought to celebrate with the Rose Garden stunt is simply appalling. And that's why even people who would have done the swap like me are simply disgusted and appalled by the way they have handled it.
Where does the politics fall here, Julie? Do you think that there's increasing concern at the White House, or that they're kind of turning the page and saying this is behind us?
It's an interesting thing to look at, because on the one hand, you have staffers at the White House who certainly recognize that this is becoming an increasing political problem for them. At the same time, if you listen to what the president said when we were traveling in Europe with him last week on Friday, he was asked about this. He was defiant. He stood by what he did. He made no excuses for it. And I think you're going to continue to hear that from him. So how those two views kind of come together, I think will be interesting to watch.
There is some vitriol out there. From veterans especially,
yes.
Anecdotally across the country, what you hear and what's showing up in polls.
Well, I would argue for the last 6 years, the iPhone has been the best friend of this administration. The short attention span of voters has really helped them at every turn. I mean, has there ever been a second term beset by more scandals and snafus than this one? It's almost unbelievable. And yet, his numbers are above 30. It's remarkable. I would say, however, elections are always clarifying. This does have, I think, the potential to hurt, on the margins, candidates, Democratic candidates who in Kentucky, for example, who might have, had maybe a chance without it, but I think this does hurt them.
So for all the candidates who came out and said quickly that Eric Shinseki should resign, they're figuring out how to deal with this.
There's not one person in America who believes Eric Shinseki's resignation helped anybody improve service at any VA hospital in the country.
But it helped Obama. It got the story.
Unfortunately, it did. That's right.
Next up, Hillary Clinton, a book tour or a presidential dry run? That's next.